The person you love got drunk last night. Then their best friend said, "Stop lying about why they left. My beloved child. Last night, the person you love drank until the truth they had hidden became impossible to control." They smiled, laughed, and acted like everything was fine. But then their best friend looked straight at them and quietly said, "Stop lying about why they left." The room fell silent. No one expected those words. In that moment, every mask began to crack, and a secret buried for far too long started rising to the surface. Don't skip. What happened next changes everything. They tried to laugh it off, but their shaking hands exposed what their words could not. Their best friend refused to let them hide anymore. "You keep blaming them," they said, "but that's not the real reason." Those few words hit harder than anyone realized. Old memories rushed back. Unsent messages. Missed chances. Feelings they had convinced themselves were gone. Everyone around them believed one version of the story, but last night that version began falling apart. Then they stepped outside, hoping the cold air would help them escape the moment. Instead, their best friend followed and quietly revealed something no one else knew. "You're still waiting for them," they whispered. This time, there was no denial. Only silence, and tears. But just when it seemed the whole truth had finally come out, their friend mentioned one hidden decision that had secretly changed everything between you. Something huge is waiting for you, and the next revelation may explain why this connection never truly ended. The silence between them became heavier than any words either of them could speak. They stood beneath the night sky, neither willing to look the other in the eye. Finally, their best friend took a slow breath and said, "You never told them the real reason you walked away." Those words landed like a weight they could no longer carry. Their expression changed instantly. The confidence was gone. In its place was the face of someone exhausted from protecting a secret for far too long. Stay till the end, because the next confession changes everything. For the first time, they admitted they had been afraid. Not of losing you, but of believing they deserved someone who cared as deeply as you did. Instead of explaining their fears, they created distance and hoped you would eventually stop waiting. They convinced themselves it was the right thing to do. But every birthday, every familiar place, every quiet evening brought your memory back. Their best friend shook their head and whispered, "You didn't protect them. You protected yourself from being vulnerable." Then something unexpected happened. Their phone lit up with an old conversation they had never been able to delete. They stared at your name without moving. Their thumb hovered over the screen, ready to do something they had imagined 100 times but never had the courage to do. Just before they made their choice, their best friend noticed one small detail that stopped everything cold, a forgotten message neither of them had seen before, hiding in plain sight all along. Their best friend reached for the phone before they could lock the screen again. Buried beneath months of old conversations was a message that had never been opened. It wasn't new. It had been sitting there all this time, quietly waiting. The moment they saw the date, their face turned pale. "How did I miss this?" they whispered. Their best friend looked at them in disbelief. One unread message had the power to rewrite everything they thought they knew. Don't skip. The truth hidden inside it was far more important than anyone expected. With trembling hands, they opened it at last. It wasn't filled with anger or blame. Instead, it carried honesty, the kind that only comes from someone who truly cared. Every sentence challenged the story they had been telling themselves. You hadn't walked away because you stopped caring. You stepped back because every attempt to reach them had been met with silence. As they read each line, the excuses they had clung to for so long began to fall apart. Their best friend quietly said, "You've been carrying guilt for the wrong reason this entire time." For several long moments, they couldn't speak. They simply stared at the screen, replaying every decision they wished they could undo. Then they took a deep breath and made a choice they had avoided for far too long. They were finally ready to stop hiding from the past. But just as they unlocked the phone to take the first step, a new notification appeared. It wasn't from a stranger. It came from someone who knew the real story from the very beginning, and what they revealed next threatened to change everything once again. Before they could press a single button, the new message appeared across the screen. It came from someone they hadn't spoken to in a long time, someone who had quietly watched everything unfold from the sidelines. The message was short but impossible to ignore. "We need to talk. You never heard the whole story." Their heartbeat quickened. Their best friend looked over their shoulder and immediately recognized the name. The expression on their face said enough. Whatever this person knew had been hidden for far too long. They opened the conversation, expecting blame or old arguments. Instead, they found an apology. The sender admitted they had stayed silent because they believed it was protecting everyone involved. But that silence had allowed misunderstandings to grow into walls neither of you knew how to climb. "There was one conversation you were never supposed to miss," the message read. "If you had seen it, none of this would have happened." Those words echoed in their mind, forcing them to question every memory they had trusted. Their best friend slowly nodded and whispered, "Now you understand why nothing ever felt finished." The pieces were finally beginning to fit together, but one was still missing. There was a conversation that had disappeared without a trace, a conversation that could explain why your paths separated in the first place. And the person who held that final piece had just agreed to meet, before the sun came up. The drive to the meeting place felt much longer than it really was. Neither of them spoke. The silence carried questions that neither had the courage to ask. Finally, their best friend glanced over and said, "After tonight, you have to stop blaming the wrong person." Those words hit harder than expected. For months, they had replayed the same story in their mind, convinced they understood why everything fell apart. But now, doubt was creeping into every memory. They arrived at a quiet cafe just before closing time, where an old friend was already waiting. Without a greeting, they slid a worn envelope across the table. "I've been holding on to this because I thought revealing it would only cause more pain," they said softly. "But keeping it hidden has done far worse. Don't skip, because what was inside that envelope would force them to question everything they thought they knew." With trembling hands, they opened it. Inside were printed messages, handwritten notes, and a receipt dated the exact day your connection suddenly changed. As they read through each page, a completely different picture began to emerge. Your last message had never been ignored. It had arrived hours too late because of a misunderstanding that no one bothered to correct. A conversation that should have brought you closer had instead pushed you further apart. Their best friend lowered their head and admitted, "We all accepted the easiest explanation instead of looking for the truth." Every sentence in the envelope stripped away another layer of guilt, replacing it with regret. They realized you had been waiting for an answer that never came, while they believed your silence meant you had already moved on. Two hearts had been carrying the same pain, separated only by one mistake that kept growing with time. Just when they thought there was nothing left to discover, a smaller folded note slipped from the back of the envelope and landed on the table. It wasn't attached to any of the other papers. The handwriting was different, careful, rushed, almost as if it had been written in the middle of an emotional moment. The first line made their breathing stop. "If you're reading this, then the truth has finally found you." Their eyes widened as they turned the page. At the bottom was a name they never expected to see. It belonged to someone who had been close to both of you from the very beginning. Someone who knew exactly what happened on the day everything changed. And according to that note, the biggest lie wasn't told by either of you. It came from someone you both trusted without question. They stared at the signature for what felt like forever. It wasn't just a name, it was someone both of you had trusted without question. Their best friend closed their eyes and quietly admitted, "I should have told you the truth a long time ago." The room fell silent again. Suddenly, old conversations, strange excuses, and forgotten moments began fitting together like pieces of a puzzle. What once looked like coincidence now felt intentional. The person you love realized they hadn't lost you because love disappeared. They had lost you because someone else's version of the story became easier to believe than the truth. Don't skip, because the next clue changes everything. Taking a deep breath, they unfolded the rest of the note. It explained that one important conversation had been interrupted before it could ever reach you. A decision made in just a few minutes had created months of silence. Their best friend finally confessed they had noticed something was wrong back then, but they stayed quiet, thinking the misunderstanding would fix itself. Instead, it only grew larger. Every day that passed made reaching out feel harder, until both of you believed the other had chosen to walk away. The weight of that realization was almost impossible to carry. "We wasted so much time," they whispered, unable to hide the regret in their voice. Then, just as they were about to leave, the old friend stopped them with one final warning. "The note tells only half the story," they said. "The real proof is locked inside something neither of you has opened in years." Confused, they asked what they meant. The answer came quietly. "There's an old voicemail. It was saved the night everything fell apart, and it contains words that were never meant to stay unheard." The moment they heard that, they knew there was no turning back. Whatever waited inside that recording was powerful enough to change everything they believed about you, and about the night this connection was torn apart. The old friend led them to a small storage box that had been forgotten for years. Inside were old photographs, ticket stubs, and a phone no one had touched since the night everything changed. The screen barely turned on, but one notification was still there. A saved voicemail. The date matched the exact night your paths separated. Their hands froze before pressing play. Their best friend whispered, "Once you hear this, you can't go back to believing the old story. A deep breath filled the room. Then the recording began. At first, there was only silence, followed by a shaky voice trying to find the right words. It wasn't angry. It wasn't blaming anyone. It was filled with hesitation, hope, and one final attempt to keep the connection alive. Halfway through the message, the person you love covered their face with both hands. Every sentence destroyed another piece of the story they had believed for so long. You hadn't been saying goodbye at all. You had been asking for one honest conversation before everything slipped away. Tears filled their eyes as they whispered, "I never heard this. If I had, none of this would have happened." Their best friend couldn't argue. For the first time, everyone in the room understood how one unheard message had changed two lives. Just when the voicemail ended, they noticed it hadn't finished recording. There were a few extra seconds at the end, seconds no one had listened to before. A second voice quietly entered the recording, speaking to someone standing nearby. The moment they recognized that voice, the entire room fell silent. It belonged to the one person who had always claimed they knew nothing about what happened that night. But those final words suggested something completely different. And if that voice was telling the truth, then the biggest secret of all was still waiting to be uncovered. The room remained silent long after the voicemail ended. No one reached for the phone. No one even looked at each other. Those final words had shattered every version of the story they had believed. Their best friend replayed the last few seconds again, listening carefully. This time, there was no doubt. A second voice could clearly be heard saying, "Don't let them know yet." The person you love felt their heart sink. If someone had hidden the truth on purpose, then your separation had never been an accident. It had been carefully shaped by someone else's decision. They whispered, "Everything I believed was built on a lie." Their best friend didn't argue. Instead, they quietly pointed toward an old folder resting on the table. "There's one last piece," they said. "And it's the one we've all been afraid to open." Inside the folder wasn't another letter or another message. It was a photograph taken the very week everything fell apart. At first, it looked ordinary. But then they noticed something no one had paid attention to before. In the background stood the same person whose voice appeared at the end of the voicemail. They weren't just passing by, they were watching the entire conversation from a distance. Their best friend leaned closer and froze. "They were there the whole time," they whispered. Suddenly, dozens of unanswered questions finally began connecting. Why certain messages disappeared. Why meetings were suddenly cancelled. Why both of you believed completely different stories. Every clue pointed to the same person, and for the first time, the truth felt close enough to touch. Just as they were about to leave with the photograph, something slipped from behind the frame and landed on the floor. It was a small folded note, aged and slightly torn. On the outside, only 6 words were written, "Open this only when you're ready." The handwriting felt strangely familiar, but neither of them could place it. With shaking hands, they unfolded the paper. The very first sentence made them stop breathing. "I tried to tell both of you the truth, but someone made sure you never believed me." They looked at each other in complete silence. If that note was genuine, then the person who had protected the biggest secret all this time was finally ready to reveal their identity, and nothing after that moment would ever be the same. The note trembled in their hands as they read the first line again. It wasn't just an apology, it was a confession. Every word carried the weight of someone who had lived with guilt for far too long. I stayed silent because I thought I was protecting both of you, it read. But my silence became the reason you drifted apart. Their best friend slowly sat down, unable to hide the shock on their face. The person you love could barely breathe. They had spent so much time searching for someone to blame that they never imagined the truth would come from a person filled with regret instead of anger. Don't skip, because the next revelation changes the entire story once again. They turned to the second page and found something even more unexpected. It wasn't written recently. The date showed it had been written only days after everything fell apart, yet it had never reached either of you. Attached to the note was a small receipt from a local cafe, along with a time and table number circled in red. Their best friend recognized it immediately. "This was the meeting you were both supposed to have," they whispered. "You actually came, but only a few minutes apart." The room fell silent. One of you had left believing the other would never show up. The other had arrived just moments too late, convinced they had already been forgotten. A few lost minutes had grown into months of silence, and eventually into a story neither of you questioned. Before they could process what they had just learned, the old friend reached into their bag one final time. This time, they didn't pull out another letter. They placed a small silver key on the table. "I've kept this long enough," they said quietly. "It opens a locker at the train station. Everything that couldn't fit inside these envelopes is still there." The person you love stared at the key, knowing that whatever waited inside that locker would answer the last unanswered question. But as they picked it up, they noticed two tiny initials engraved into the metal. Those initials belonged to someone neither of them had suspected, and discovering why they were there would uncover the biggest truth of all. The silver key felt heavier than it should have. They turned it over again and again, unable to stop staring at the engraved initials. "This can't be right," they whispered. Their best friend took the key, studied it for a moment, and slowly nodded. "Those initials were never supposed to be here." The old friend explained that the locker had remained untouched for years because only one person knew what was hidden inside. If the contents had been discovered earlier, the entire story would have changed before the distance between you had time to grow. Every answer now waited behind one small metal door, and for the first time, hope felt stronger than regret. They reached the train station just as the morning rush began. Hundreds of people walked past without realizing that one forgotten locker held the truth behind a connection that had never truly ended. Their hands shook as the key slid into the lock. It clicked on the first turn. Inside wasn't money or valuables. There was a small box, carefully wrapped, along with a bundle of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Resting on top was a simple note that read, "If you're opening this, it means fate gave us another chance." The person you love couldn't hold back their emotions anymore. They recognized the handwriting instantly. It belonged to someone whose words had been missing from their life for far too long. As they untied the ribbon, one sealed letter slipped onto the floor. Unlike the others, it had never been opened. Across the front, only one sentence was written: "Read this before you decide whether the story is truly over." They froze. Their best friend quietly stepped back, giving them space to make the choice alone. They knew that once the seal was broken, there would be no returning to the life they had believed was real. And hidden inside that final letter was one truth powerful enough to rewrite every memory of the day you lost each other.